The warning ignored in the far edge of the Orion Arm, where stars shine like silent watchers over endless dark. A cluster of ships moved slowly through the emptiness, their lights blinking in rhythm like the heartbeat of a quiet storm among them. The human vessel named Horizon drifted with grace and purpose, carrying within it minds, full of dreams and memories and fears that only silence could hear. Commander Ray stood near the wide glass panel at the front of the bridge, his eyes scanning the stars as if searching for something lost in time. He had seen peace for almost 2 decades now, and in those years humanity had changed masks from warriors to explorers, from builders of destruction to guardians of life. But deep inside, Ray knew that this peace was only the surface, a thin veil over something ancient and wild. The Galactic Union had accepted humans long ago, but only after forcing them to sign countless treaties, promises of restraint, promises of mercy, promises that Earth would never again bring fire to the stars. And humanity agreed, not because they were weak, but because they were tired, and for many years they kept those promises, hiding away old weapons, old programs, old instincts in vaults buried under oceans and mountains, and codes known only to a few. The aliens saw this calm, and they smiled and nodded and whispered in their grand halls that perhaps the humans had finally evolved. Perhaps the Deathworlders had tamed their nature. Perhaps the beasts of Earth had become something safer. But not all believed that, not all trusted that sleep would last forever. Far away from Horizon, on a rocky planet named Vetra Prime, under twin moons and skies painted in red mist, a human colony lived in peace. Fields of blue wheat swayed with the wind, and children ran along paths carved through the glowing grass, and life felt untouched by fear. But watching from the shadows above them, hidden in silence, were ships of the Krell fleet, dark and spiked like claws ready to rip through anything soft and warm. The Krell were not part of the Union by choice. They obeyed its laws because it kept their enemies quiet, but they had never respected the humans. To them, Earth was a joke, a creature with fangs dulled by treaties and claws locked behind laws. And when the Krell leader, General Morkash, saw the human science fleet drifting near their border, he grinned with sharp teeth and gave the order that would change the stars forever. The attack began without warning, no signal, no demand, only fire and thunder and screams. Vetra Prime turned from paradise to nightmare in a single rotation. Buildings shattered, skies burned, children ran but found no shelter. Horizon received the distress call, first a faint whisper from deep space, one sentence broken by static and fear. They're burning us. Please help. Then silence. Commander Ray felt his breath freeze, not in fear, but in something colder, a memory that reached into his bones. He turned to his second officer, Mira, her hands shaking as she scanned the data feed. A message came through secure line from Earth: short and final, activate protocol. Gray, in a chamber hidden beneath the Horizon control room, Ray reached for a panel sealed with codes no one was meant to touch. His finger hovered for a moment, then pressed the sequence. The ship changed. It was still the same outside, but inside something old had awakened. The lights, dimmed weapons, unlocked systems once sealed by law, began to hum like beasts waking from hibernation. Back on Earth, oceans moved, mountains shook, satellites blinked with life, and in bunkers forgotten by most men and women in cold uniforms stood up and prepared for war, the kind of war that had not been spoken of in years. General Hale watched the feeds, his voice calm but firm. Tell the colonies, prepare for blackout. Evacuate non-combatants, reactivate the old fleets, and someone find the Revenant. It's time they remembered who we really are. In the Union Council Hall, glowing with golden light, ambassadors argued in confusion. Some denied the news, others demanded restraint, but none of them could erase the reality. The Krell had broken the unspoken rule. They had touched the one thing humans never allowed to be harmed, their people. Ray stood now in his command chair. His voice carried through the ship like thunder. We gave them peace. We gave them respect. We showed mercy, and they saw it as weakness. Fine, let them see the other side of US. Now let them meet the Deathworlders, not in suits, not in peace, but in truth. A young cadet asked, Sir, are we going to war? And Ray answered, not war, justice. and if they fear us at half strength, then let them see what happens when we stop holding. Back all across human space, something was rising, not just weapons, not just ships, but memory ancient and raw, not rage, but resolve, the kind that builds when mothers lose children, and when soldiers are forced to watch from distance, the kind that turns explorers back into warriors and makes silence into storm. And as the stars turned and the screams of Vetra Prime echoed through the vacuum, one thing became clear. The humans had not changed, they had only waited, and the wait was now over. The chains break. The stars had started to watch with different eyes now, as if they too felt something heavy moving between galaxies. A silence before the storm, no longer quiet, but sharp and alert across the systems, where humans had settled the echoes of Vetra Prime were spreading like fire through dry grass, families crying, soldiers. Awakening cities once filled with laughter, now wrapped in shadows of memory deep. Under the ice of Europa, where light never touched and silence ruled for centuries. A black vault opened for the first time in 20 years. Inside the vault, machines, older than the war treaties, hummed with new life. Massive engines crafted not for defense, but for destruction, rose from their metal graves and prepared to move again. The program behind this awakening had one name: Protocol Gray, and now it was no longer theory, it was truth. General Halle stood in Command Center 12, watching a wall of data moving like waves, his eyes cold, but calm, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Bring the Spectres online, release the Titans from dry dock, authorize the I-Core 3, and reactivate the Revenant. No more chains, no more blind faith in peace. We hoped they would never push this far, but they did, and now they will remember what Earth was built for. A bunker below the ruins of old Shanghai, a soldier named Kara stood in front of a screen, her eyes wide, her breath steady. She had been trained since childhood, not for ceremony, not for peace talks, but for the moment when humanity would need to show its true self. She had never hoped for that day, but she never feared it either. Her fingers moved over the console and doors opened, revealing armored suits so advanced they looked like walking storms on Mars. The wind carried red dust across the silent yards of a forgotten weapons depot. Inside, the ground rumbled as machines moved again. Turrets lifted, power cells glowed, and a giant warship known only by code as Black Sun began to rise from beneath. The crust engineers ran across platforms shouting commands, but their hearts held the same truth. This was not vengeance, it was warning, and it came with thunderback. On horizon, Commander Ray watched the feed from Earth with a heavy heart beside him. Mira scanned the new orders and read out the list of deployments, with a voice that shook not from fear, but from something deeper. The Revenant is awake. Spectres have been released, the I-Core 3 is unlocked, and the Black Sun has broken surface. We are no longer explorers, we are Stormbringers now. Ray nodded, his mind filled with faces from the colony children who used to send drawings to the ship, messages filled with laughter and wonder, now gone in ashes and screams. This war was never what he wanted, but now that it was here, he would see it through, not with rage, but with clarity. The kind that comes when there is no more doubt, only duty. In the Krell war chamber, a room made of bone and steel, General Morkash paced with slow steps. His officers watched him with growing unease. They had expected panic from the humans, begging apologies, perhaps even surrender. But what came instead was silence, followed by power waves of power and speed no one expected. Now the Krell fleet began to feel a chill, not from cold, but from the understanding that they had poked something ancient, and it had opened its eyes. Reports flooded in from outer posts, entire patrol fleets gone without a trace, orbital stations vanishing in flashes of light and shadow. A single name kept repeating: Revenant. The humans had told stories of it, once a ship with no equal, born not for defense, but for judgment. AI-driven humans, sharpened and visible when needed and unstoppable when seen. Now it was real, and it was coming. In the heart of the Galactic Union, diplomats screamed across tables demanding answers, blaming each other, arguing about laws and treaties and broken peace. But none of their voices could stop the rising fear. Their words were dust against a wall of force now moving without mercy. Their sensors picked up strange signals, entire human fleets moving without trace warforms. Activated communication channels burned silent because no one was asking for permission anymore. On a moon near the Krell border, a civilian outpost tried to contact its command center, warning of a strange human vessel approaching. No response came, only silence, then a flash. Then nothing remained. The black box that floated later through debris recorded the last words of a young officer. It's not speaking, it's not firing, it's just watching. And I think I know now why they called them Deathworlders in a hidden chamber under Mount Kilimanjaro. Elders of Earth's forgotten councils, gathered not for politics but remembrance. They spoke no words, only activated a device locked for centuries. It sent a single pulse into the void, a message to all of humanity, not in sound, but in instinct. We are no longer chained. Ray stood once more before his crew, each of them trained to explore, not to destroy, yet none of them blinked, none of them stepped back. They all knew what was coming. They had lost friends, family, colonies, and now their hearts burned not with hate, but with a fire born from love and duty, and a promise made long ago: if you hurt our people, we will not ask, we will act. As Horizon turned toward the Krell borders, its engines glowing like stars, and its path sharp and silent, the voice of Earth echoed across its systems like a whisper carried by wind. They wanted war. Now they will see the price. First strike. Darkness spread across the edge of Krell territory, not from the lack of stars, but from something deeper, something that moved without sound and struck without light. In the middle of this silence, a single ship drifted forward, its hull black, its shape sharp like the point of a blade. Its name whispered across coded transmissions and desperate calls. It was the Revenant, the Krell outpost near the mining moons of Droska. The Fourth had not seen combat in decades. Guards slept during shifts. Officers laughed at warnings. They believed no force could cross their defenses, and even if something did, they were sure it would fall quickly, because they had forgotten what fear felt like. They had forgotten the lessons of Earth. It began with a signal, faint and strange, not in any known pattern, just a slow pulse every 10 seconds, then silence, then another pulse, then nothing again. The Krell scanned for ships but found only Space Clean, and still they sent a drone into orbit. But the drone returned with no data, just static and shattered lens. Then the lights across the outpost flickered once, and all systems went blind within seconds. The Revenant dropped its cloak and appeared above the station like a phantom from legend, its weapons silent, its movement smooth, like a shadow gliding across water. And before the Krell could react, the first strike came, not as fire but as light. Thin beams sliced through their engines, their comms, their shields. No explosions, only flickers of death inside the command center. Krell officers screamed into dead systems, while outside their fleet drifted useless cold, and confused. Their ships began to vanish one by one, clean cuts across the metal, leaving behind nothing but floating halves, like pieces of broken glass. And then the voice came over every channel, clear and calm and human. This is not revenge, this is a warning. Remember what you started on. Horizon. Commander Ray watched the feed from the Revenant without speaking beside him. Mira stared at the destruction, her hand gripping the console, not in fear, but in sorrow. They knew this mission was not about killing, it was about message. They needed the galaxy to understand that peace was not weakness, and mercy was not submission. The same time, deep in Krell High Command, alarms screamed across crystal panels. Leaders gathered in panic, screaming over each other. Some demanded immediate war, others begged for retreat. No one could explain how one human ship had done this much damage without a single casualty on its side. The Krell had never seen this kind of warfare. Silent, clean, surgical, and unforgiving. General Morkash sat alone in a dark chamber, watching the slow replay of the attack over and over. He studied every second, every angle, trying to find an error, a flaw, a crack in the human method. But he found nothing, only precision and silence and the quiet anger of a species that had stopped pretending to be soft back on Earth. Cities were lit with new energy. Children watched from homes as ships passed overhead. Fathers held rifles once buried in basements. Mothers checked food supplies and medkits, not out of panic but preparation. They had heard the whispers of the galaxy, and now they were writing their answer, not in words, but in steel in. A refugee camp on Vega, 9 survivors from Vetra Prime gathered near a screen as images from the Revenant. Spread across systems, many wept not from grief but from pride. They had lost their homes, but they had not been forgotten, and now they saw the price being paid by those who had believed humans would stay down. Mira walked into her quarters alone, her hands still shaking from the data feed. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at a drawing taped to the wall, a gift from a boy named Rico, who used to send her messages every week from Vetra Prime. Now he was gone, and all she had left was the crayon picture of a spaceship flying through stars with a smiley face and a message written below, "Fly safe, Miss Mira." She whispered his name once and promised he would be remembered in the Galactic Union. Panic turned to fear, and fear turned to silence. Ambassadors stopped their arguments, analysts stopped their reports. All eyes were now on Earth and what it had become. The races that once mocked humanity now avoided their path, afraid to speak, afraid to be noticed. One question echoed in every chamber: who are they when they are not holding back on the Revenant? The AI known only as Echo moved through systems like wind through leaves, its mind fast, its thoughts sharp. It had been designed not to destroy, but to protect, and now it was doing both with a calm that frightened even those who built it. It calculated probabilities, adjusted tactics, responded to threats before they could exist, and when the last Krell ship near Droz'Ka, the 4th, surrendered, Echo sent only one word: acknowledged. Ray listened to the reports piling in. More Krell stations, abandoning posts, patrol routes, left empty military outposts, sending signals of surrender, not from battle but from fear. And still the human fleet held its line, never crossing borders, never touching civilians, always clear in message: we strike only when forced, but when we strike there is no second warning. Stars had changed again. Now they watched with awe and caution. Systems that once viewed Earth as a distant curiosity now marked it as a center of gravity, a force not of chaos, but of order, forged in fire, sharpened in silence, and wrapped in patience. In the stillness that followed the first strike, across the remains of broken steel and silent stations, the galaxy held its breath, because now it knew the truth. The humans had never been dangerous when they were playing nice. The real danger had always been what lay behind the silence. The war unleashed. Stars moved slow above the Krell homeworld, as if they too felt the weight of what had begun far below the surface. Leaders gathered in war chambers, voices rough and full of fear, the air thick with tension, walls flickering with battle reports that kept getting worse. No plan had worked, no strike had slowed the human fleet, and now entire sectors once under Krell command had gone dark. The humans had not invaded, they had not claimed planets or resources or demanded tribute. They had only targeted fleets, weapon stations, and military outposts. All strikes clean, precise, fast, and without warning. The Krell ships had better numbers, but none of them had the cold focus or the sharp silence of the human war machines. It was no longer a war of strength. It was a war of understanding, and the humans understood how to end it. Above the red oceans of Krell Prime, the black ship known as Black Sun hovered like a shadow covering the sky. No message came from it. No threat, no demand, just presence, its weapons locked on every Krell military complex. Its systems fully online and waiting 1,000 meters below the sea. Human divers in armored suits moved like ghosts, disabling sonar lines, planting sensor scramblers, and mapping every inch of the ocean floor. General Morkash stood in the central tower, staring through thick glass at the massive shape of the Black Sun, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. The sky used to belong to them. It used to be their shield. Now it was a mirror showing them what they had ignored for too long. He knew retreat was the only way left, but his pride wrapped around him like iron chains, and he could not break it. Not yet. In the outer rings of Krell space, human ships surrounded the main relay station that connected their worlds to the rest of the galaxy, but no missile was fired. Instead, a signal was sent, one clear sentence: this is not conquest. This is correction. Destroy weapons, stand down, return to peace, or face silence from your skies inside. The Galactic Union, a new energy had taken over, one built not on words, but on fear. Even old allies of the Krell had begun to distance themselves. Ships rerouted, cargo missions cancelled, ambassadors recalled. Earth had become not just a voice in the Union, it had become a storm behind glass, watched from a distance, respected, but not approached. Ray now stood aboard Horizon as it moved along the outer edge of Krell territory beside him. Mira had grown quieter, her eyes holding something cold but deep, something heavy that could not be measured by rank or orders. She no longer smiled, not because of pain, but because she had learned what it meant to become the shield of those who had no voice. Message came through encrypted, wrapped in layers only human ships could read. The words were brief but clear. Union Council requests meeting, immediate location, secure terms, neutral. Ray nodded once and gave the order, set course for Helix. Summit let them speak across space. The Horizon moved like a whisper, followed by escorts, black and quiet, each one holding power behind. Silence, ready for war, but sent for peace. When the ship reached the summit ring, an ancient station carved into an asteroid, humans stepped off, wearing armor clean and sharp, not to threaten, but to remind the galaxy what was now watching inside the chamber. Lights dim and walls wide. The meeting began. Voices rose, but none dared shout. They knew who stood before them. They had seen the reports. They had heard the signals, and now they listened. Ray spoke only when needed, each word shaped not for rage but for truth. He said, "We did not start this. We asked for peace. We followed every rule, but peace is not given, it is kept. And when someone burns our homes, we do not run, we rise one by one." Members of the council agreed. New rules would be set, new protections written not for one species, but for all under the shadow of what had happened. Lines would be redrawn, treaties rewritten. Earth would no longer be asked to kneel. It would be asked to lead, not with pride, but with memory. Back on the battlefield, things had changed. Krell ships powered down, their fleets recalled, their soldiers no longer confident, no longer sure. Many whispered of surrender, but none knew how to speak it. The fear of losing face stronger than the fear of death, until finally General Morkash sent a single signal, 3 words across open channels: "We accept terms." The war ended, not with a bang, not with celebration, but with silence, a silence full of loss and understanding. Human ships returned to patrol positions, weapons locked but unused, their mission complete, not in conquest, but in reminder. Across the stars news spread. The Deathworlders had shown their full strength, and now the galaxy knew what peace looked like when protected by hands that once knew only fire. Mira walked through the Horizon alone, her boots soft against the metal floor. She paused near the window, watching the stars drift by. She thought of Rico, of the colony, of the fire that took them, and the silence that followed. She closed her eyes and whispered their names one by one, not in pain, but in honor. Beside her, Ray stood still, his voice soft like the wind. "We did not ask for this, but we answered, and now they know." In a quiet corner of Earth, an old man watched the sky, his hands folded, his eyes steady. Beside him, children played, laughing, chasing stars drawn in sand. He listened to the laughter and smiled, not because the war had been won, but because the future had survived. Across human space, life began to move again. Slowly, carefully, but with strength. Schools reopened, ships returned to trade, explorers prepared for new missions, and mothers told stories not of glory, but of guardians, of protectors who waited in silence and rose only when they must. And as the galaxy turned and the stars watched in quiet agreement, one truth remained clear: the humans had never wanted war, but when war came, they had answered not with rage, but with resolve, not with conquest, but with clarity. And now every world that heard their name would remember not just what they did, but why they did it. The final message, soft wings moved through the green fields of New Terra, a planet once marked only for farming, now remembered for something far greater. Children ran through the long grass, their laughter rising into the sky above them. A quiet hum echoed from patrol ships gently passing through the clouds, watching not as threats, but as guardians. Peace had returned, but this peace was different, shaped by scars and memory held firm. By silent strength, Commander Ray walked slowly through the garden near the horizons. Docking Bay, the sun low behind the trees, casting golden lines across the path beside him, Mira moved without speaking. Both of them, wrapped in the weight of what had passed, and what now stood before them, they had fought a war that never needed to happen, answered a challenge that never should have come, and now they carried its silence like a second skin, messages from across the stars. Flowed in, each one filled with caution or respect or quiet gratitude. Some spoke of trade, some spoke of diplomacy, but all carried the same tone. None questioned Earth anymore. None doubted what humanity had become. The Deathworlders had earned their name not through destruction, but through control. Power held with care, unleashed only when the line was crossed. On Krell Prime, the damage had been deep, not just in steel, but in pride. The Great War halls now stood empty, the sky free of ships. The people silent in thought. Leaders walked with slower steps, their voices lower than before. Even General Morkash had changed his tone, no longer roaring in pride, now speaking in measured words. He had seen what could not be unseen. He had faced the storm and lived to remember. Ida. Single statue had been placed in the center of the capital, not of a hero, not of a weapon, but of a child holding a drawing, a human child with eyes closed and hands raised to the stars. Below the statue was a plaque with simple words. Sometimes strength is not shown by fists, but by the fire we choose not to lighting. The Galactic Union, a new council formed, one built from shared fear, but also shared purpose. Earth now held a seat not near the end, but at the center where decisions moved through their voice. Like current through water, Ray had not wanted this power. But now that it was here, he carried it with the same care he gave his crew, never seeking war, but never stepping back from duty. Deep in the mountains of Earth, where old bunkers had once echoed with alarms and weapons, now farmers grew crops in warm soil. Families built homes in valleys where missiles had once slept. Laughter filled the air again, and in quiet corners, old soldiers sat by fires, not telling tales of victory, but of silence, of the moments before action, of the weight of choice, and the price of peace. In a school near Luna Base, a teacher stood before her class, showing them the old map of the human sectors around her. Young eyes watched with wonder. She spoke of stars not as targets, but as doors of species, not as rivals, as neighbors. And when one student asked why humans were called Deathworlders, her answer came slow and strong: because we come from a place where life must fight to grow, where every breath teaches you to stand and protect, and when that nature meets stars, we do not run, we remember. Mayra now stood at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a quiet lake. Her uniform folded neatly beside her, a soft wind pulling her hair across her face. She thought of Rico and others, lost names, faces, memories that had shaped her. She breathed deep, not in pain but in promise. The war was over, but the duty remained. Never again would they let silence be broken without answer. Never again would mercy be mistaken for weakness. In the orbit above Earth, the Revenant drifted once more, silent and invisible, its systems still active, but its weapons at rest. It had returned not as a sword, but as a shield, a symbol of what humanity could do, and what it now chose not to do. I Echo watched the stars, calculating possibilities, analyzing paths, always ready, but never seeking its core logic. Unchanged, protect without question, strike only when no path remains. Always defend, never dominate. Ray stood before the new fleet, not to launch war, but to end the old era. His voice carried through the halls, not loud but steady. We did not rise to burn, we rose to remind. We are not your enemy unless you leave us no choice. We do not seek fear, we seek peace. But if you take peace from us, we will take silence from you. As ships returned to stations and soldiers returned to families, the stars watched again. Now calm, now steady across distant worlds. Songs were sung, stories told, poems written of the humans who once wore chains and then chose not to break them, but to fold them into shields. In the halls of old empires, the name Earth no longer stirred laughter, only thought, only respect, only memory. And somewhere in a quiet place among stars, a signal moved, slow and patient. It carried a voice, not loud, not sharp, but true, a message From Earth broadcast into the void, not for enemies, not for allies, but for those still watching, for those still listening. The voice spoke clear and simple. This was us at full strength. Remember it, carry it, speak it, and pray you never need to see it again. The end.